Brilliant, thanks very much, Taris. As Taris mentioned, my name is Dave Campbell, Microsoft 365 consultant here at CompanyNet. Long history in Microsoft technologies, from on-premise solutions through to the cloud and the transformation and change that comes with that. So today we're going to be focused entirely on information protection, with a little smidgen of governance in there as well to sweeten things up. I'm going to talk about three tools within the Microsoft 365 toolbox that really assist when we talk about data and protecting and governing that data. So what I'll do is I'll step through the agenda initially. So let's go through just to let you know what's on the agenda today. So first of all, we'll talk about the data lifecycle and the vision. And then we'll look at the Microsoft Cloud tools that we're going to be discussing. Then we'll step through into the first of those, which is sensitivity. So sensitivity labels, classifications, etc. We'll discuss retention. So retention, then deleting, then managing the data in the preservation hold library and various other things, and then data loss prevention as well to protect the data in transit. So a lot to talk about, so let's crack on. So first of all, data lifecycle governance is vital. It helps us protect or prevent data loss, so sensitive information from leaving the organization. Helps us to encrypt our kind of communications or our data that leaves the organization to ensure that we are protecting it in transit and not just within situ. We need to restrict access, so controlling access using RBAC controls or controlling external access or guest access. It's all vital to ensuring that our data is secure. Watermarking your data, so labeling it, classifying it, applying a watermark to the documents, a watermark to the email communication. They're all vital to ensuring that we know what the contents of those documents are, and it helps us understand or kind of establish, what our data is, or to know our data better. Retention, so retaining data for that specific amount of time that your internal or external governance specifies. And not just that, but managing the deletion of that data when that time is kind of reached its end kind of goal, and then archiving as well. So ensuring that data is, if we need to store it for any length of time, if it's something that's not regularly accessed, then we make the use of the archiving functionalities to start thinking about that. So all of these things are really vital to ensure that our data and over its life cycle is governed in a really good kind of way. So let's look at the vision when it comes to kind of the tools that we're going to discuss today. So three important points here. So we need to make sure that our important information is protected. We need to ensure that we are compliant. And we also need to ensure that we are efficient, or as efficient as possible. So I'm just going to step through just a couple of little points about each of these. So if we start with the important information is protected. So what we mean by that is that it can't be accidentally, or I know this word gets me every time, maliciously deleted or lost. It can't be accidentally or maliciously leaked. So that's where things like data loss prevention come into play. Its sensitive information is marked so it can be protected, so watermarking there, so we're labeling our content, we know what that content contains, and then on that we can apply kind of actions off the back of that, which you'll understand when we step through the kind of later part of today's slides or presentation. So we're compliant, so we retain information we are required to keep. We dispose of information we are not allowed to keep, and that's really important. So, not just retaining for the specific amount of time that we need to retain that information for, but ensuring that, to keep things clean, keep things tidy, ensure that we're not keeping hold of any really sensitive information that we no longer require or no longer required to keep, managing deletion at the end of that retention cycle. So all of those things are things that help to make us more compliant. And then we are efficient, so keeping huge amounts of redundant, obsolete and trivial or rot information costs, and it costs in terms of storage, management, compliance, search and discovery. There really is, a kind of hidden cost when it comes to kind of keeping data that you no longer require to kind of to retain or to kind of manage, because there is so much, you know, man hours that are involved, or kind of teams time or administration overheads, and then it also adds to the kind of the issues when it comes to, you know, DSARs or anything like that. It's that extra bit of information that we need to scan and kind of pull through and need discovery requests. So lots of things to kind of think about when it comes to our raw data. Now let's look at the data lifecycle. This is quite a great diagram. It's one that a lot of organizations use, and it's one that Microsoft use, and I like it because it really defines how our data kind of traverses through its life cycle. So initially, as you can expect, our data is created. So this can be anything from a PowerPoint presentation like today's presentation, or a SharePoint document library, or a SharePoint site. You know, email communications, various kind of data. Our data is created, and it's created in various places. Next, it moves. Now, this is inevitable. So if we create our PowerPoint presentation, we work on it in our OneDrives, then that's obviously going to, once it's ready, it's going to move into either Teams, which uses SharePoint at the back end. So SharePoint. It could also be printed out. Could be kind of could be a chat message. Could be sent to a mobile device. It could be various different methods. But the ultimate kind of point here is that our data is created, and our data then ultimately moves across its life cycle. And then finally, data leaves your company. So, you know, things like email communications, sharing of SharePoint data, sharing of OneDrive data, sending attachments via email, printing things out, pen drives, various kind of methods that things leave our country or our company. So the really important factors here are that we know our data. So our data is created, we're labeling it, we know what it contains, we know what extra controls we need to apply to that. And that's where protect and govern your data comes into play. So applying the proper controls and policies there to kind of ensure that it's managed in a really good way, and preventing data loss as well. So when our data leaves the company, we're ensuring that the right data is allowed to leave, but then the sensitive data is either controlled in a better way, or it's prevented from leaving the organization. So that, as you can expect, the Microsoft Clouds introduces powerful tools, data vision, and there are so many powerful tools out there. There's 3 we're going to focus on today, but you will have heard us in our security sessions and in various other webinars that we've had already. You know, there are so many tools out there that help to protect the data in its kind of transit and its life cycle. But the 3 tools we're going to talk about today are sensitivity, so that's sensitivity labels, retention, so retaining our data, retention policies, the retention labels, what the difference is, and then data loss prevention as well. So just to give you a little bit of an initial top level view of these before we go into these in a bit more detail. So sensitivity. So why do we need sensitivity? So users need to collaborate with others, both internally and externally, with the kind of the introduction of so many different collaboration tools, Teams primarily being one of them. You know, collaborating on documentation, sharing information. It's happening internal to our organizations, and it's also happening externally. So, you know, marking, you know, controlling that data is going to be really important. As I mentioned, so collaboration technology has made it easier to share information. As you can imagine, if the organization is using Teams, then it is really simple to kind of share your content and collaborate on content with others within your organization, but also with external organizations as well. So it's definitely something that requires sensitivity to start managing things in a better way. And then not all information should be shared. So, you know, things that are too sensitive, you know, maybe they are for internal use only. So there are controls that are put on top of that to manage that. So If we look at the what, so how sensitivity helps with those why scenarios. So what sensitivity labels help protect files and emails by adding watermarks, headers or footers so that users are aware of the need to protect the information. Encrypting content if that content needs to go anywhere. So if that needs to be emailed to another organization, maybe a partner organization, then we're ensuring that we're encrypting that with the kind of inline encryption technologies to ensure that we're protecting it in that further enhanced way. And monitoring as well. So every label you create, everything that we create within our kind of compliance dashboard, it all allows us to monitor how things are being used, how things, where things are going, what's leaving the organization, what's being shared, etc. So it gives you that kind of great monitoring once you apply those labels. And then sensitive labels can be applied to Teams, Microsoft 365 groups and SharePoint sites also to enforce privacy, external access and unmanaged device access. I'll go into this in more detail when I go a bit deeper into sensitivity labels. But what you can and can't do there is it's really powerful. It's really good. So I think it'll be an interesting topic. So we'll delve into that a bit later in a moment. And then let's have a look at retention. So again, let's go and look at the whys. So you need to comply proactively with industry regulations and internal policies that require you to retain content for a minimum period of time. Reduce the risk in the event of litigation or security breach by permanently deleting old content that you're no longer required to keep, as I mentioned in the kind of start of today's session. And then help your organization to share knowledge effectively and be more agile by ensuring that your users work only with content that's current and relevant to them. So not just a kind of a compliance element, but more around an efficiency there as well when we're talking about ensuring that you're working on the most up-to-date versions of the content. So really important things. And then let's step into the what. So a retention policy and or label. So we'll go about to explain about the difference between a label and a policy about later on. So a policy or label can help you achieve all of these goals. Managing content commonly requires two actions. So retaining content so that it can't be permanently deleted before the end of the retention period, and then deleting content permanently at the end of the retention period. So both of these come hand in hand with ensuring that you're complying, but you're also then being efficient with managing the data as soon as you've reached the end of your retention period. We'll go into that a bit more deeply in a second. But just finally, data loss prevention as well. We'll step through in a bit more detail in a moment. But the whys with data loss prevention, so effective collaboration with partners, supply chain, consultants, etc. now goes far beyond email. So we talk about Teams chats and collaboration, SharePoint, OneDrive sharing. It can be too easy to accidentally or maliciously share sensitive information. And we've seen a lot of scenarios recently, especially where this has been the case. Whether things are shared externally and leaked to the dark net, and then that data is readily available, and it's happened to so many large organizations. So ensuring that we are controlling that, protecting our sensitive information, ensures that we're mitigating that issue. So we're removing the kind of the potential risk from the situation, which is great. So what can data loss prevention help us do? So data loss prevention policies are used to identify, monitor and protect sensitive information across Office 365. We can then apply actions to notify, warn users or block sharing of that content, which just really gives you that power to kind of manage and how your kind of data is being sent. And when we talk about sensitivity types or different sensitive information types, there's different ways that this can be applied, which I'll explain when we talk about that a bit later on. So let's delve deeper into sensitivity labels, shall we? So As we mentioned, there's two different types of retention label, sensitivity labels. Files and emails, that's your content, your files, your emails, every document, document libraries, all of the contents of those is managed by your files and emails policies. And then groups and sites, which are classed as container policies. And what they do is they protect the site, the SharePoint site, the M365 group, which in turn would be a Microsoft team. And it protects them from being deleted and content being lost, etc. So different ways we can manage that, but then also gives us the ability to kind of, depending on the content or depending on the label that's chosen for the group or the site, then different controls or different configurations can be set, which we'll explain just in the next slide. So team, group and site label container label policies. So if we look at containers, so does not label files within the container. So important to mention that this is only for the site or the M365 group itself. And it's really there to, in fact, let me step through and you'll be able to see. So what this can enforce is it can enforce the privacy. So it can make it either public or private. So public being that anyone within the organization can join that or add that team. Private being that people need to be invited into that. Yeah, so great way of managing our teams, great way of managing our SharePoint sites. But important next is external user access as well. So using these sorts of labels, you can apply a policy that denies the ability to share or invite other people into that team or into that SharePoint site. So it ensures that it's internal only. So again, depending on the content of that. And just equally, we can open things out as well by having an external variation of that policy. So it's quite important. External sharing from SharePoint sites as well. And then also one of the new ones with the group configurations is the access from unmanaged devices. So if you're using Endpoint Manager or as it used to be known, Intune, then the ability, if you have devices enrolled in there, then you'll be able to manage or you'll have managed and unmanaged devices to ensure that the content is only accessed or consumed via a device that's managed by your organization. So an extra we kind of layer their protection. You'll see there that in the Teams context, you have a nice kind of, it tells us the kind of the risk level of the team when we have it open within the console. So again, it's constantly reminding you of what or where this is applied, which really kind of aids and benefits visibility of these things. So next we're looking at Office 365 sensitivity labels. So this is for your files and your emails. So if we step through here, so they're used to classify Office documents and emails. So, for an example, you could have a sensitivity label that is official business. So it's your default label. So it's applied by default to all documents that are created or modified within your organization. You then have a official sensitive, which then uses sensitive information types to analyze the content for any sensitive information. That could be financial, could be custom information, which I'll talk about in a moment. And that just basically allows you to apply extra controls, different controls to that sort of label. As an end user, you'll be able to see these within the sensitivity part of the Office suite. You'll be able to select the kind of the label that you deem is the right label for your policies. You can also apply auto labeling, which is more of an E5 functionality, so an E5 license, but it allows you to automatically assess and classify existing data within the cloud, but then onto the on-prem hybrid scenarios as well, which I'll talk about in a moment. So yeah, the label travels with the document, which is really important to know. Can be used to encrypt a document or email. So again, with that actions functionality, when you're creating that label, can also be used to add a watermark header or footer. Now, this is something that we see all organizations using when they're using sensitivity within Office 365. is they'll add a header and a footer, which basically states the kind of nature of the label, with different colours or different sizes depending on the kind of the sensitivity that's being used or being protected. It just simply requires a subscription version of Office as well, generally available in the E3 and E1 for the native functionality within Office. So yeah, as long as there's a subscription version of Office in general, then you have the functionality to apply the sensitivity labels to your documents. Now, if we look at the Azure Information Protection, so the Unified Labeling Client, this is where we start thinking about other aspects. So, you know, we've got our Office apps for Enterprise. We've got our standard built-in sensitivity labels, like we've just mentioned, that we can apply, that we create in the cloud. What we can do with the Azure Information Protection Unified Labeling Client is we can protect things more document types we can protect, documents within Windows 10 environments we can protect. With the client installed, you can right click a document within your C drive, within your wherever that document is, and you can protect that based on the labels that you have configured within your kind of labeling policies, also your labels within the cloud. So definitely ways that great kind of use case for the ULC. So just to step through the functionality of this, so older and more feature-rich than the Office 365 sensitivity labels. It can be used for files outside Office 365, such as those in file shares, as I mentioned. The UL client allows users to set label in Office applications and by right-clicking files in Explorer. UL client is better suited for hybrid environments because it gives you that functionality of doing things on-premise, or within file shares, etc. And the AIP scanner tool, which is a derivative of this, is something that you can install on a server. What that can do is that can scan your repositories, your on-premise repositories, for any sensitive information types and apply a corresponding label should that be required. And it's probably important to note here that all the out-of-the-box PII or sensitive information types are financial UK data, but then there's wider spread than that. You have national insurance numbers, passport numbers from various countries. But what doesn't limit you is the ability to create custom sensitive information types using regular expression. And again, you can build out a regex to cover things like bank sort codes, but then adding keywords to increase the confidence score, etc. So, you know, you can, if you've got an internal registration number or a number that is sensitive information or protected for you, you know, maybe it's something personal like you know, sexuality. If you're storing that data for an individual person, then that sort of data you want to protect, and you can use custom built sensitive information types to do that. And you can use the AIP scanner then to scan and protect things in situ as well, which is a great functionality. There is the ability to auto label in the cloud as well, which focuses purely on the SharePoint sites and or SharePoint content, you know, OneDrive content, everything's held within the cloud. And again, that sits solely within the E5 kind of licensing band. But, you know, once you unlock the E5 licensing, you're then able to use this function. And once you implement it, there's definitely no way you would kind of ever go back from that, because it's such a seamless way of applying labels to stagnant or static data that's already exists within your estate. So if we go into just more information about the Azure Information Protection Unified Client, so the AIP and Office 365 sensitive labels can be synced. So you'd sync your Office 365 sensitivity labels with Azure, and Azure would then be able to pull those labels down to the AIP client and to the AIP scanner, which is great. They can then be administered from either Azure or Office 365. The sync is continuous, so any changes that you make to one in Azure or one in the Office 365 portals, it will reflect or be updated in the other portal. An update to the IP client has been released that supports both label types, and it's good. It's great functionality. They're going to expand this, make things better as time goes on, which is a good thing to be able to see. It also changes the protect button to sensitivity in Office to align it. So you'll see with the AIP or the old AIP Classic client, you'll see the protect button, but with Office 365 native tools, it's sensitivity. So there's that kind of new AIP client is then aligning that and bringing that into line, which is great. And yeah, the new unified client will be further developed. It's the one that they're focusing on, and just to point out that the old AIP client, so the AIP Classic client, will not be. So yeah. Cool, so AIP labels versus Office 365 sensitivity labels. So the main difference to note is that AIP is better suited to hybrid environments. So as I mentioned, with the ability to encrypt file server content or content on your Windows 10 device. Can use it to encrypt a wider range of file types as well. And as I mentioned there, on a traditional file server, for example, right in Windows Explorer by right-clicking and classifying and protecting. So definitely some good functionality there that the kind of the labels or the kind of clients add to the kind of to the system to the function. Just a little bit about licensing and features there. So as you can see here, Office 365 E5 or M365 E5 has all of the functionality that you would expect there. So it has the automatic stuff, it has the manual elements, and various kind of encryption technologies there as well. If you step down to E3, so M365 E3 or Office 365 E3, generally that's all the manual functionality, so you wouldn't be able to do any of the auto labeling. Instead, this would just anything that's created or modified, the labeling functionality would kick in at that point. And then also some of the encryption technologies and using customer key for Office 365 and various other things are not kind of included within that. I think it's basic encryption that you get with E3. But then EMS E3 gives you some of that functionality as well. So a great diagram there, and you'll be able to kind of use that once we send the slides out. Excellent. So let's delve a bit deeper into retention. So retention in Office 365. So there are two ways that you can retain and delete information in Office 365. So that's using retention labels. So retention labels manage retention and deletion. So they can do disposition reviews, event-based retention, and quite a lot more. However, you can only use them to manage SharePoint, OneDrive, Office 365 groups, and Exchange email content. So disposition reviews are generally when you receive or you get to the end of your retention period. Notifications are sent out to let people know that you are there, so you can review the content and you can understand whether you need to delete that content or retain it even further. So really important kind of function there that's only available within a retention label. Then we have retention policies, so they also allow you to manage content for retention deletion. They're broad policies that you can use to manage Microsoft Teams, Skype for Business, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange public folder content, and they can also manage the content sources listed under retention labels as well. So, a lot wider scope there when it comes to what it can be applied to. However, these are blanket policies that are applied generally at the top level. So as you can expect, these are designed to work together. So let's have a look at the following table here. So we see the retention policies, they are generally applied by administration, so admin, at the tenant level. So applied to a site collection, a mailbox, or a OneDrive account. You can apply retention periods. You can apply deletion actions after that point. Doesn't do disposition review, so you need to manage that content either by the automatic deletion or by keeping a manage on the data. And retain or delete based on created and modified as well. So just keeping that in mind, but they can be applied to. It's got the whole list of kind of elements that those can be applied to, which is great functionality. Great from a top level and for basic to kind of medium complex retention policy requirements. Retention labels, so they're generally applied by the user, but they're generally more granular, so they'll be applied to documents, emails, folders, document libraries. But again, very much a user-specific policy. They handle retention, they handle deletion, and they also add in this functionality of disposition review, so that you're managing what happens after the retention period ends, which is quite important. It's also important to manage who that person is, so that they understand it and they understand what needs to happen when that kind of review notification comes out. Retain or delete based on created, modified, when labelled, and a specific event as well. So it gives you more kind of granular functionality there. But again, just to highlight, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Office 365 groups are primarily where you can apply retention labels. Okay, so let's move on to how does retention work. Now, if we look at SharePoint and OneDrive, so when content is subject to a retention policy, people can continue to edit and work with the content as if nothing has changed because the content is retained in place and in its original location. But if someone edits or deletes content that's subject to the policy, a copy is saved to a secure location where it's retained while the policy is in effect. So that will disappear from the SharePoint library, but it will be contained within the preservation hold library for the length of the retention period before the the follow-up actions can be applied. And you can see that in the diagram there, we've got the content is modified or deleted, or it's not modified or deleted, and how that flows through the retention. Great diagram to have. So you'll be able to kind of have a look at it probably when you get the slide deck. Now, if you look at mailboxes and public folders, now again works in a similar way, but just different naming elements here. So for a user's mail, calendar, and other items, a retention policy is applied at the level of a mailbox. For a public folder, a retention policy is applied at the folder level, not the mailbox level. So both a mailbox and a public folder use the recoverable items folder to retain items. So preservation hold library is a document library for SharePoint and OneDrive. Recoverable items folder is used within the mailbox content and the public folder context as well. So only people who have been assigned e-discovery permissions can view items in another user's recoverable items folder, which is paramount because e-discovery, they're required to be able to pull on this data that's being retained. And again, great diagram there, one that clearly shows how things generally work for content is modified or deleted, or content is not modified or deleted, so that you can understand the flow for both. And just quickly, just to highlight the principles of retention. So the way that retention works as from a rules or I like to call it retention laws. But yeah, it's generally retention wins over deletion. If a conflict remains, then longest retention period wins. If another conflict remains, then explicit wins over implicit for deletions. And then if a conflict remains, the shortest deletion period wins. Yeah. So it's a great kind of mantra to think about when it comes to kind of retention and how it's going to make the judgment calls, especially if you have different retention periods applied to the same document libraries, or you have a retention policy and a retention label to subsequent files, etc. So a great kind of rule outline there that makes it a bit easier to kind of digest. And then just licensing and features again, same rule of thumb here, any manual functionality tends to be E3. You know, applying kind of basic labels and that kind of thing, or retention labels as well. When it comes to E5, that's where you can do things like applying default labels to SharePoint libraries, folders, and document sets, automatically applying a retention policy, etc. You know, various kind of things there, but it's a great kind of table to have a look at if you're looking to kind of purchase the right functionality for your organization. So finally, let's delve deeper into data loss prevention. Now, data loss prevention policies are a DLP policy can be identify, monitor, and protect sensitive items across Teams, Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive. And then Office applications, and then Windows 10 devices as well. So if you think about data loss prevention now, you know, our data resides in various different places. You know, the cloud, obviously, with Teams, Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive elements. The Office applications as well, you know, creating documents and consuming documents and, you know, sharing content within PowerPoint, etc. You know, we also need to manage the data there, but having that extra functionality to manage the data within the Windows 10 devices is something that really advances or really kind of aids the kind of the DLP policy creation, because then you're protecting it through the entire kind of surface there. So if that data is shared or given or kind of you know, emailed, etc., then you've got that DLP policy protecting what can happen with that data. So it's quite good. When certain conditions are met, so if we've got a policy that defines that we are you know, sending information to an external organization, you know, it's picked up you know, maybe a debit card number, maybe 10 debit card numbers. And what it could do is it can show a pop-up policy tip to the user to warn them they may be trying to share a sensitive item inappropriately. Or we could potentially block the sharing and allow the user to override and capture the user's justification. Or we could block the sharing with or without an override option. For data at rest, sensitive items can be locked and moved to secure quarantine locations as well. So lots of actions that we can do based on the type of data that's been sent, what medium is being used to send that. So if we were emailing something to an external organization, it contained a document that had debit card numbers, as I say, with more than 10 debit cards in there. Then what we can do is we can block that from being shared with a policy tip or information being shared with the person sharing the information to let them know why it's been blocked. You know, just to kind of protect the organization. And there's ways that you can build that really kind of build functionality, but also build, you know, protection without hindering kind of collaboration and, you know, continual kind of working, etc. So it's something that's really important. And then for Teams chat, the sensitive information will not be displayed. So Teams chat's relatively new with data loss prevention, so you can apply data loss prevention policies now within a Teams chat. Generally E5 functionality, but it's something that's really powerful as well. So it's not just looking at the data at the back end, it's looking at the information you're sharing within Teams chats, whether that's internal or external, if external communication or collaboration is enabled. So policy rules, let's just step through a few of these. So monitor, so predefined policy templates. So we have, as I mentioned earlier on, we have financial data, but what this does is it creates a kind of template that you can utilize when creating your DLP policy. Then contains all of the financial data, contains all of the medical data, contains all of the privacy data. for various countries. So for the UK, you'll have all of the kind of, debit card, EU debit card numbers, which require run checks as well. So, that they're valid, and various kind of other things. But you can also create kind of custom policies as well that pick certain sensitive information, especially if you've created your own custom elements. So that's what we mentioned here, the custom policy that uses sensitive information types, retention labels and sensitivity labels as well. Location, so Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams chats and channel messages as well, on Windows 10 devices, as I mentioned. They can be deployed and protected using MCAS, that's Microsoft Cloud App Security, if that's something that you have enabled on your tenant. Some basic discovery functionality comes with E3, but with E5 you get full feature-rich analysis of your cloud apps and your traffic. And I'm now delving into the security webinar that we did a while back. But yeah, you can use MCAS to start applying these labels, also to monitor the labels as well to keep an eye on how things are going. And then on-premise repositories as well can be protected using DLP policies. Some of the conditions that we can apply. So item contains sensitive information. Item has a sensitivity label, so as you can see, works in conjunction with our sensitivity labels, which is quite a powerful functionality. And the item is shared internally or externally, depending on what that condition depends on the actions that you apply to that. And next we'll discuss the actions, but you can see that you have quite a lot of function here when it comes to, the rules for the policy. So, what locations it covers, what conditions you can apply, what templates you can use. There's even now a kind of DLP recommendations kind of widget that Microsoft have released. So if you don't have any DLP policies created, that it will recommend some basic DLP policies to apply. And they can generally be applied by just clicking a button and letting it create that policy for you. Give it a name, and then it's going to start kicking in. And most of these policies can be created in report-only modes, so they don't have to be applying actions from the get-go. It can just be used to start monitoring and seeing what sort of data is being shared and passed and moved within your organization, to then start allowing you to build out what your actions need to be out the back of that. And that could be from the user tip perspective initially. So once you've done the report-only mode, you're now looking at educating your users. So you're going to let them know that, okay, we're going to allow you to send this email, but just for your information, you shouldn't be sending this sort of information to this organization or this external source. So you can really learn from those policy tips before you then start applying actions on top of that. So I suppose it's quite an easy way to kind of get on board with DLP, but it just takes a bit of time to go through those kind of phases. But anyway, I digress. If we step on to the actions that you can apply within the policy. So choose the action to take when the policy conditions are met. So the action depends on the location where the activity is happening. So some examples are, so SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive, block people who are outside your organization from accessing the content. Show the user a tip and send them an email notification that they are taking an action that's prohibited by the DLP policy. So again, that's a great way of carrying out an action that blocks and protects us. But then we're educating as well. We're letting people know that, okay, well, this is blocked because of this reason. And they learn from that, they move on, they kind of find better ways or efficient ways of sharing that information if that information needs to be shared. So a kind of great scenario there. Let's look at the next one. So Teams chat and channels. So block sensitive information from being shared in the chat or channel. This is a great functionality and one that I think really sells the E5 licenses, because it gives you the ability to kind of analyze information that's sent within a chat or within a channel within a team. And if any sensitive information, so if you're sharing a document or you're mentioning something that's looks like a national insurance number or looks like a a reference or a custom regex that you've built for your organization, then what it's going to do is going to allow you to apply kind of controls over the top of that, so you can block that from being sent, and also apply a user tip, which will, as if you're aware of the team's kind of policy tips which come up when you try to send a message. It will tell you exactly why you're not able to send that message, and then again it educates the user, lets them know that that's probably not the best way to be sharing that data, and just allows them to find better ways of doing that. And then Windows 10 devices, so audit or restrict copying a sensitive item to a removable USB device. One of the big kind of scary elements is copying sensitive information to kind of a USB. That USB is taken off premise and it's lost, or it's given maliciously to others. So applying the protection at the device level to audit and restrict it is something that is just extremely powerful, that makes DLP worthwhile when it comes to kind of how you can protect and control your data. And then Office apps, so show a pop-up notifying the user that they are engaging in a risk behavior, and block but allow, override as well. So again, this is really using the tooltips, so the notifications that when sensitive information is being picked up within a document or within an email communication or within a PowerPoint presentation, that this data will not be able to do this because of this reason, kind of thing. So you're applying the controls, but you're not leaving out the ability to educate your users so they know how to manage their data in better, more efficient and secure ways, really, which is really important. So let's just have a look at the licensing and features for DLP. And you can see the only functionality really there that is E5 only is the Teams chat channel conversation kind of DLP, just because of the technology that's used at the back end, the machine learning and AI. I know there's also a manual element in there as well, so there's checking of that data as well that needs to happen. So it lives solely within the E5 license, unfortunately, which is a bit of a problem. So we've only got 5 minutes left. What I wanted to do is just to quickly just show you a couple of these tools within the compliance center. So if I jump into my demo tenant here, you can see I'm in the compliance center here, which is accessible from the M365 admin. And in the compliance center is where all 3 of these tools lives. So you've got data loss prevention there, which I'll step through in a second. You have information governance, which is where retention lives, and then information protection, where our sensitivity labels are in themselves as well. So if I jump into information protection first and foremost, you can see here that I have labels, label policies, and auto labeling. So the labels is where we create our labels. Now, the labels will be created, but you need to publish them using a label policy before they're readily available to the wider organization. And auto labeling is again that E5 functionality, which will apply labels automatically to your cloud only kind of document storage. So your SharePoint, your OneDrive, it's going to pick or assess or scan out and assess any documents that are in situ, and apply a label according to what it finds within that document. So it's a great functionality that only is possible within E5. So labels, so let's create a new label just so you can see some of the functionality here. I'm just going to call this test 1. And again, you're given a description for the users there. So again, this could be what you have in your governance documentation. You can paste that in here so that when people hover over the label, they'll be able to see the description, so when they should be using this label. For this, I'm just going to simply pop in some random information. Scope, as you can see, the 2 different scope types here. So files and emails, which is all your content, and then groups and sites, which is your containers. So I'm just going to leave both ticked for the moment. and then just step through here. So we're stepping through into files and emails first. So here we have the option to mark the content of files or encrypt files in emails. So depending on the label that we're creating here, if it's just an official business or something similar to that, then we probably just want to be looking at marking the content of the files. If it was containing sensitive information that we didn't want to leave the organization, or we're going to allow to leave the organization, but we wanted to encrypt it, then we can apply the encryption element to that. So probably for the more sensitive labels. So let's just leave mark the content for the moment, and then we'll go next. So here you can apply the content marking. So you can add a watermark, which is the watermark at the diagonal background of the document. Most organizations tend to add a header and add a footer, and then they'll customize the text and put in the label name potentially, or use something along those lines. So if we go for a show business, and then we'll just leave it font size is black, and align text, we'll go for center. So you can see there gives us a nice kind of look at what we're going to apply. And then I'm going to pop in a footer there as well. Just going to leave that exactly the same. And then we'll go next. So that'll apply that to emails as well. And then if I go next, I could click it properly. This is where auto labeling comes in. So if I was going to auto label based on this policy, I could create an auto labeling depending on the sensitive information types that it would include. But for this example, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to quickly show you some of the group functionality you have. So you've got privacy and external user access settings. I'm going to enable those, and external sharing and conditional access settings as well. So the privacy and external user access is where I was discussing, making things public so that anyone in the organization can access it, making it private so that it's invite only, or none. So it's all defined by the owners of the team or group. And then you've got the ability to block or allow external access. So you can let Microsoft 365 group owners add people outside your organization. So if this was containing sensitive information, you'd maybe want to leave that unticked to ensure there is an internal only team or kind of group, which is good. So again, a lot of functionality here is the same you would get when you were creating a Microsoft team. Then you can control external sharing from labeled SharePoint sites by applying that option there. And you could also use Azure AD conditional access to protect labeled SharePoint sites as well. A lot of the kind of sensitive label actions work really well with conditional access, especially when it comes to some of the kind of unmanaged device kind of elements. So if I enable that, I can set the default label for the SharePoint sites for external sharing. If I select this one, then I can start looking at, okay, well, is my device managed? If it is, then we'll allow access. But if it's not, then let's maybe limit the access or something along those lines. And that works really well with conditional access in both Endpoint Manager as well. So yeah, I just wanted to show you that, and I'll very briefly show you data loss prevention. So if I was to create a new policy here, so if I go into my policies, let's create a policy. I just want to let you know some of the functionality that we can do here before I hand back to Taris. I'm sure Taris will kill me because I make all this time. But these are the templates that we mentioned previously. So financial is going to pick all of the financial data for all countries. Medical data, again, kind of the different countries' medical information. Privacy, so Privacy Act information, PII, all that kind of elements. Generally, most organizations go custom policy and start selecting whatever they want to choose, but you have the templates there if you choose to use them. So with every policy that you create, you need to create where you're going to apply this. Generally, if you do a different policy for the different locations, it tends to work a lot better because you'll have more functionality available to you when you create a rule. So if I look at Exchange first and foremost, I'm just going to leave it as all and none for the moment, but you can choose distribution groups that it applies to, or exclude distribution groups that it doesn't apply to. We'll go next. We'll create a customized rule. And this is where you've seen some of the screenshots in today's presentation, where you can apply conditions. So this is all the mail specific conditions here. You can see that there's a multitude. So a sender is a member of, any email attachments content could not be scanned. File extension is. So a lot of this comes from Exchange transport rules, which are quite good. But again, down the bottom here, where's content? Content contains, and then we can add in their sensitive information types. So we can apply it to specific sensitive information types. And again, from here we can look for the UK only specific ones, and apply it to kind of all of these if we deem that necessary. And then we can apply we can add our exceptions. You can add like loads of conditions in there should you require it. You can add in exceptions to the rule, and then we can also add in the actions here as well. So restricting access or encrypting content, add recipients to the BCC box, add sender's manager to the recipient so that they get visibility of this. So lots of actions that we can take just because we've selected Exchange or email kind of notifications, and then we can apply user notifications, which are generally your tooltips, etc. You can customize the policy tip text, so you can really build in the education piece of it in total. Lots of other things, but I'm not going to go too deeply into it. I've already overrun my time. But with that, what I'll do is I'll hand back to Taris, who will close us off.
That's great. Thanks very much, Dave. Very comprehensive and very good timing as well. So before we look at any questions that have come in, just like to thank you all for attending our event this morning. Hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. We're really keen to carry on the conversation around Microsoft 365 with you. Appreciate we have a mix today of existing customers and people that perhaps we haven't spoken to before, and you'll all be at very different points in your Microsoft 365 journey. Either way, CompanyNet has the means to help you get more out of Microsoft 365. So if you're interested in having a chat with us about how we can provide something tailored to your needs, get in touch. We'll be sending out one follow-up email after this event with a video recording of it, so you'll be able to watch that. I think we have time just to answer a couple of questions. So John asks, talking about retention, if an item is deleted from a SharePoint site, does it still exist or show within the SharePoint site's document library? Hope that makes sense, Dave.
Yeah, it does indeed. Yeah, that's a great question. Generally, when you delete an item from a SharePoint site, if it's under retention, whether it's a policy or a label, then it will be removed from the SharePoint document library, so no longer exist within that location. And then I mentioned during the slides the preservation hold library, which is a separate document library, and that's where it will reside until the end of the retention period. So the answer to that question is yes, it removes itself from the SharePoint site.
Great. One more question here from Nish. With DLP, can you use this in conjunction with Exchange transport rules to build out deeper DLP policies?
It can indeed, yeah. Probably that question was asked prior to the last slide there. But yeah, especially if you target the DLP policy at Exchange, so email communications, then you can apply transport rules directly from the DLP console, but not all the transport rules or Exchange transport rules are in there, but they're expanding more and more as time goes on. So you'll find there's most of the functionality in there, which is great.
Great. I think that's pretty much our time up, so we'll need to wrap it up. So thanks again to everybody for attending today. Hopefully you found that a useful event. This is part of a series of events, our Get It Sorted series. So we'll be in touch by email to let you know when the next one is coming up, as well as any that we're rerunning. In the meantime, if you want to drop us a line, you can visit us at company-net.com, as you can see on the screen there. Thanks very much.